Okay, any questions you have? I think some of you have asked me when will be the first test. Probably another 2-3 weeks, because we have not covered much of mechanics yet. So that's why the exam or the test is not being held right now, but maybe in a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks, I don't know. We will see. First I have to arrange how to make up the class also. So think about how to make up the class. I will talk to the audio visual people and see if we can get Wake Forest and Oak Ridge on the same day. Okay, so let's go back to our familiar problem. So we have this point X, and we apply loads to the body, so it is deformed into one little x. So P goes to P prime, and we have a vector PQ that goes to P prime Q prime. And we wrote 3 equations which relate positions in the present configuration to position vectors in the reference configuration. And since it's 1-to-1 and onto, this can be solved. Time is fixed, so we are not changing time. So all we are doing is really comparing two configurations or 2 shapes of the body. So what is P prime Q prime? This ith component we wrote is Fia. It's evaluated at the point P, which we are not writing anymore, times PQA. And we said last time that if you pre-multiply by F inverse, that's where we were last time. If you pre-multiply by F inverse, you get PQA equal to F inverse P prime Q prime. So this is going backward. Instead of finding P prime Q prime from PQ, we are finding PQ from P prime Q prime. So what is ds square? So that's PQA, PQA. So that's PQ, x component of PQ square plus y component of PQ square plus z component of PQ square. It's summed on A. A is a repeated index, so it is summed on A. And if we substitute for PQ from this equation, bless you. So all I'm doing is substituting for PQ in terms of P prime Q prime. Okay. So what is, if we define B, B, 3 lines means definition, 2 lines means equals, and 3 lines means definition. So it's not a mistake. I'm purposely putting 3 lines. So what will be B inverse? To see that, first we can write this equation as B in the direct notation. If I'm going to write this in terms of matrix multiplication, how will I write it? if I want to write this equation like Bij, remember A is summed. So there is a matrix multiplication. A is summed. So there is matrix multiplication involved. If you want to multiply these two, the summed index must come next to each other. The summed index must appear next to each other. Like they should, if you go from left to right or right to left, you should see AA, not AJA. So how can I make it AA? Transpose. So I transpose the second one. So it's B is FF transpose. So what will be B inverse then? If you take the inverse of the product of two matrices, what do you have to do? What do you get? So how will I write B inverse now from here? Am I making sense? Is my, see, you know, B is F is equal to F, B is equal to FF transpose. So what is B inverse now? So when you take the inverse, then you have to reverse the order of multiplication. So it's F inverse transpose F inverse. F transpose inverse is the same thing as F inverse transpose. Okay? F inverse transpose is the same thing as F transpose inverse. So now if you write this in terms of indices, so I have B inverse Ij. So the first index, so on F inverse is AI, but we have transpose now. So this is F inverse transpose. So F inverse AI, so F inverse transpose will be IA, F inverse JA, sorry, AJ. F inverse is, it has the first index capital and the other one lowercase. So if we go back here now, so what do we have then? And incidentally, this thing is same as B inverse Ji. Because if you interchange I and J, you really don't I think I wrote this wrong. This should be AI.
So where does the transpose come in?
Where does the transpose come?
So you have F inverse transverse. If F inverse AI is regular F inverse, where does the transpose come in? Do you understand the
Okay. See, when we will write this in the direct notation, this A and A summed means these are multiplied. So when I will take the transpose, this will be switched, and that will indicate this equation. So, okay, let me go here again. So B is FF transpose. That's the way we define it. So what is B transpose? B transpose is F transpose, and if you take the transpose, then you get F transpose, F transpose. And what is the transpose of transpose? Original matrix back. So that is F transpose. So what does that tell us? That B is equal to B transpose.
Symmetric.
So B is symmetric. So if B is symmetric, its inverse is also symmetric. So B inverse is same thing as B inverse transpose. So if B is symmetric, its inverse is also symmetric. Does that make sense? Okay, this is not my rule. This is the matrix rules, that if you invert a symmetric matrix, you get a symmetric matrix. Okay, the inverse of a symmetric matrix is a symmetric matrix. So B is symmetric, so B inverse is symmetric. So we can say that we are defining B inverse Ij as F inverse Ai, F inverse Aj. So if we define B inverse Ij as F inverse Ai, F inverse Aj, then we have ds square is B inverse Ij P prime Q prime I, P prime Q prime J. Josh, speak up please and press that button.
We were wondering why is it not Ji taking inverse?
Since it is symmetric, you can write Ji also. See, B is symmetric, so it doesn't matter whether you write Ij or Ji. I guess to answer your question, generally speaking, the first index here is I, the first free index on the right side is I, so I'm writing the first free index on the left side as I. A is summed, so A is not a free index. Like there are two A's on the right hand side. Okay, so now if I divide this by the length of P prime Q prime, if I divide this by the length of P prime Q prime, so I get B inverse Ij as P prime Q prime I over ds, P prime Q prime J over ds. So I'm dividing by ds square both sides. It's little ds. That means the length of P prime Q prime or length of the vector in the deformed state. Deformed state, or present configuration. So what is this quantity now? What is this quantity in terms of something you see in the figure? Direction cosines of P prime Q prime. So these are components of a unit vector aligned along P prime Q prime. So let's write this a little mi. So what will be this thing? Little mj. So little m is a vector is a unit vector along P prime Q prime. So little m is a unit vector along P prime Q prime. Now I subtract from 1 So I subtract from 1 the left hand side and the right hand side. We have not changed anything, okay? Does it make sense? So what do we get then? We have d little s square minus ds square over d little s square. This 1, I'm going to write it as delta ij mi mj minus b inverse ij mi mj. The first term is mi, like m1 square plus m2 square plus m3 square. That is 1 because m is a unit vector. This term is 1 because m is a unit vector. Actually, we did the same thing last week also. So this becomes then delta ij minus b inverse ij mi mj. So mi mj is a common factor, so we can take it out. And this quantity, which is again the ratio of, this is change in the length squares divided by the length square. So it's still non-dimensional. It gives you, roughly speaking, how the length of the elements is changing. However, in the denominator now, we have the present length rather than the undeformed length. That's the only difference between what we did now and what we did last week. So last week we had capital DS here. Now we have little ds. So if you are working in the reference configuration, which most of the time we do in solid mechanics, then we use the previous definition of strain. If you are working in the present configuration, which we do in fluid mechanics, then we will use this definition of strain. Even though in fluid mechanics we do not talk about strain. In fluid mechanics, if you just take a course in fluid mechanics, generally speaking, they do not talk about strain. They talk about strain rate. Okay, not strain, because strain in fluid can be very, very large. Can be. So we really also when we talk about material properties, the stress in the fluid generally does not depend upon strain. It depends upon strain rate, except if you are talking about a compressible material. So if you account for the compressibility of gas or water, then you need the change in volume per unit volume. And we will talk about that later on. So this one. So this quantity is denoted by twice epsilon ij, the quantity in the box. The quantity in the box is denoted by twice epsilon ij, and this is called Almansi Hamel. These are two different persons. Almansi and Hamel are two different persons. So this is called Almansi Hamel strain tensor. So if I take mi equal to delta I1, so take mi equal to delta I1. So what are the components of this unit vector m? So what are the components of this unit vector m?
1, 0, 0.
1, 0, 0. So it's a unit vector along one axis in the present configuration, in the deformed state. So we get then ds square minus d big square over ds square equal to twice epsilon ij delta I1 delta J1. Because we have mi mj, so m is delta I1, mj is delta J1. So what is this quantity equal to? Yes?
Epsilon 1, 1.
So it's epsilon 1, 1. Because this I and I is summed, so it's replaced by 1. J and J is summed, so it's replaced by 1. So epsilon 1, 1 gives you, roughly speaking, change in length per unit present length. Remember, we are comparing squares of lengths, so we should not be saying change in length per unit length. Only if the change in length per unit length is small, then this quantity does reduce to change in length per unit length. Otherwise, we are comparing squares of lengths, not the lengths themselves, they are squares. So how many ways can we find the strain? So we have learned F, the deformation gradient, gives us strain. C, which is F transpose F, gives us strain. B, which is F transpose gives us strain. E, so we said 2E is C minus 1, or identity. Twice epsilon is 1 minus B inverse. So we have 5 different ways to define the same quantity, strain. All of them are related. See, if you know F, you can find C. Because C is F transpose F, B is F transpose. So if you know C, you can find, if you know F, you can find C, you can find B, you can find E, you can find epsilon. The reverse process is not always clear. Also, if you write in terms of displacements, so if you remember, no, I do not know if you remember or not, but we wrote E, A, B, like twice of E, A, B as UA comma B, not wrote, we derived it, plus UB comma A, plus say UI comma A, UI comma B. Spears?
I'm good now.
But your neighbor is, maybe he wants to.
He was explaining something to me. I was just clarifying the notation.
Oh. Okay, yes, Islam.
Mi and mj are the components of deformed vectors.
They are components of the unit vector M in the deformed state.
But how did you assume it unit vector? Because this is deformed vector.
But see, we wrote here P prime Q prime over its length. So that's a unit vector. P prime Q prime is the vector itself. ds is its length. So if you divide the vector by the length, you get a unit vector. Right? I'm sorry? But m is its component, yes. So I'm assuming that if you take a vector parallel to x1 axis, what is the strain along that line? See, if I had put a strain gauge parallel to x1 axis, what will be the strain in that gauge? And the strain in that gauge is given by this 2 epsilon 1 1. So that gives you an interpretation of what epsilon 1 1 is. Similarly, epsilon 2 2, you take a gauge along the y-axis or x2 axis. This is not putting the gauge in the undeformed state. This is putting a gauge in the deformed state, which you really don't know. Well, that is the problem in mechanics, is to find the deformed state. Does it make sense? We are assuming that we have put a strain gauge on the deformed specimen, or we have put a strain gauge which in the deformed configuration comes out to be parallel to x1 axis or x-axis. In imagination, you can imagine anything you like. In real life, putting a strain gauge which will end up along parallel to the x1 axis is difficult. So that's why you will work with a big E rather than epsilon. So with the big E, with the big E we had ds square minus big ds square over big ds square was twice EAB MA MB. So the only difference between what we did last week, in the denominator we had big ds square. Now in the denominator we have little ds square. So we are defining strain as change in length per unit present length. Previously we said it is change in length per unit undeformed length. Both are equally good, equally bad. I mean, this is a definition of which it depends what you like. The advantage of defining the strain as change in length, per unit present length, is that even if the deformation is large, you may be able to add strains. But you cannot do that if you define it as change in length per unit undeformed length. So to make my point, so what I'm saying now is that, say, axial strain, incremental axial strain. So dE, I'm saying it is dL over L. So take any line element you like. So you draw a line on the body. Basically, we can do it only on the surface. We cannot see inside the body. So you draw a line. So its length is L. And you apply loads to it. So the length will change. So I can say the length has changed by dl. So I can say, okay, the axial strain along that line is dl over L. Change in length per unit length. So what will be the total strain? So if I keep on doing it, like keep on applying loads, so keep on adding dl over L, dl over L, dl over L. Every time, of course, my L keeps on changing too. And in this case, then you get, say, L initial to L final is log L final over L initial. But if you put undeformed length, then you don't get anything like this. Then you cannot deal with the large strains, basically. Okay, now the question comes, if I'm using one of these large definitions of large strains, what will happen if I take this body? So that's undeformed state, and say apply torque to it. Okay, so I apply torque or torsion. So the body goes here. So this point X goes to X1. So this torsion means you are like, I am applying deformation gradient, say F1. Because the reason I put superscript 1 is because I'm going to now either stretch it or apply tension or compression, some other load. In the mechanics of deformed class, you learned that you can add quantities. Like when you did the problem under combined loading, you split it up into separate problems for each loading, found the strains and stresses and added them up. So what I'm going to show you here is you cannot add strains now. So if supposing you deformed in torsion and now you stretched it, so this point, the same point has gone to a different position. So the total deformation is F. The total deformation is F. Our deformation gradient is F. So what we have done is the following, that X1 is a function of XA. Time is fixed, so I'm not going to put time. Time is fixed, so it doesn't matter the time. What about this xj2 is a function of little x1, because we went from here to there, but this is a function of xa, because little x is a function of big X. But that's the first equation, right? So how will I define F, total F? What is the definition of the deformation gradient in going from this configuration to that configuration? What is F in going from the undeformed state to the final deformed state? Pardon me?
Chain rule.
Yeah, but yes, chain rule. But first is this definition is, so that's the that's the gradient of the final deformation with respect to X, big X. That's the definition of deformation gradient. Now, as Islam said, we use chain rule of calculus. So you differentiate this with respect to little x1, and then you differentiate x1 with respect to big X. Remember, this is summed on j. So it's on the right hand side, it is summed on j. It's not a simple, like, it's differentiate with respect to x1, then x1 with respect to xa. Differentiate with respect to x2, then x2 with respect to xa. And this is summed on j, which means it's addition. or in this case, so what will be the, how can I write this in terms of deformation gradient? So what is this quantity in the box? I think. So what is this quantity in the box in terms of F1 and F2? Is my question making sense? So what is this quantity in the box in terms of F1 and F2? So this is the deformation gradient in going from this state to that state. We are differentiating coordinates in the final configuration with respect to coordinates in the intermediate configuration. So this is this quantity in the box I have is F2. So it's F2, and the convention we follow is the index in the numerator is the first index on F. Whatever index we have in the numerator is the first index on F. So there is I in the numerator, so I'm writing ij rather than ji. So then this will be F1 ja. So the total F then is F2 multiplying F1. So it's multiplication, not addition. The deformation gradients are multiplied rather than added to get the total deformation. You cannot multiply C or B. Only deformation gradients are multiplied, not C's and B's. Now supposing, let's go a little further and say this is my undeformed state. We apply F1, say torsion. Now we get intermediate state. Now we apply pressure. So we get X2, and now I stretch it. See, first I took the body, twisted it, then I applied, say, another deformation, say pressure to it. So it's a hollow cylinder. So first I twisted the hollow cylinder, then I pressurized it, and then I stretched it. So what will be the total deformation then? In going from, so what is the total deformation? I know you know the answer. So. Anyone else will volunteer? Say Ashley at or Kathy at Wake Forest.
Okay, good. You just multiply them together, so F1 times F2 times F3.
Very good. So it's F3, F2, F1. So but multiplication has to be in the specific order. You cannot, multiplication of matrices does not commute. Multiplication of matrices does not commute. So you have to start with the first one is if it's multiplied on the left by F2, then multiplied on the left by F3. and then F4 and F5 if you have. What if I reverse the order of deformation? Will I get the same deformation? See, if I reverse the order of deformation, like I said earlier, I first twisted it. No, and then applied pressure, and then I stretched it. Now I take the same undeformed body, I stretch it by the same amount. I do not know what should I say. May say 10% or 15% or say 100%. I stretch it by 100%. And then I apply pressure to it. Same level of pressure as I had before. And now then I twist it. So will I get the same deformation? Same deformation gradient? And the answer is no. Matrix multiplication does not commute. So if you apply these F1, F2, F3 in different orders, you will not get the same F. So the order of application of the deformation is important. You cannot arbitrarily do that. In the small deformation theory, yes, you can do it. You can, because there you are adding things. So A plus B is same as B plus A. But here you are multiplying things, but you are not multiplying scalar numbers, because 2 times 3 is same as 3 times 2, but you are multiplying vectors. Sorry, matrices. So you are multiplying matrices, and matrix multiplication does not commute. Okay, now what is the easiest deformation one can think of? This is an imaginative experiment, and you can do in real life too. So what is the simplest deformation we can think of? Remember, deformation is change in shape. So the simplest one can be translation. You just move the body from place A to place B without doing anything to it. So that does not induce any strains. It does not really change the shape of the body if I move it from here to there. But if I rotate it, you may think it changes the shape. Okay? There is no strain induced, but depending upon your viewpoint, the shape of the body has changed. And the third thing is you stretch it. So this F, if you take any matrix F, this does not have to be deformation gradient. If you take any 3 by 3 matrix F, take any 3 by 3 matrix F, one can always write it as the product of 2 matrices, one of which is orthogonal. R is orthogonal, which means R inverse is R transpose. So R is orthogonal, which means R inverse is R transpose. And U, here, matrix U is symmetric. So U equals U transpose. U equals U transpose. This is a theorem in mathematics. I am not cooking it up. This is called polar decomposition theorem. If you go to Google or Yahoo or Wikipedia, decomposition theorem. It's called polar decomposition theorem. So U is symmetric. Also, not only U is symmetric, but eigenvalues of U no, eigenvalues of U are not diagonal terms. So that means some of you don't know the eigenvalue of a matrix. So I will define it. Okay, I will define the eigenvalue of matrix. Just give me 1 second. So these are non-negative. So what is the eigenvalue of matrix? So lambda is an eigenvalue of U if there exists, if there's a vector say what will you like to denote a vector by? Say A. Okay. If there's a vector A such that U operating upon A equals lambda times A. You know, in the book, there is a section called preliminaries, mathematical preliminaries. Please review it. I think an eigenvalue, an eigenvector is defined there. So lambda is an eigenvalue of U if there is a vector A such that UA equals lambda A, and A is called the eigenvector. Maybe I should say D here then, corresponding to the eigenvalue lambda. So for every matrix, you can find eigenvalues and eigenvectors. So this equation we have here, so this is U operating upon A, lambda, I can write this as identity matrix. I can write this as an identity matrix operating upon A. Because vector A is the same thing as identity matrix operating upon A, which means I have U minus lambda times identity operating upon A is equal to 0. It's a 0 vector. So we will be here for another 2-3 minutes after 12:05. So we might be here till 12:10. Because I want to define this eigenvalue, eigenvector. So how many equations do we have here? 3. A has 3 components. We are in a 3-dimensional space, so A has 3 components. So we have equations for A1, A2, A3. And the right hand side is 0. So when will we get a non-trivial solution for A? No. When the determinant of this matrix is 0. So you will get a non-trivial solution for A if and only if determinant of this matrix is 0. So that means we will get an eigenvector, a non-trivial eigenvector. 0 is of course an eigenvector of every matrix. Thus 0 eigenvector corresponding to 0 eigenvalue is a trivial solution. We are not interested in that. 0 vector is an eigenvector of every matrix. So that's not of interest. I think I misspoke. 0 vector is an eigenvector, but 0 itself, that number 0 is not an eigenvalue of every matrix. 0 vector is an eigenvector of every matrix. The number 0 itself is not necessarily an eigenvalue of a matrix. Okay. So if you expand this now, I think to answer his question, what kind of equation will we get in lambda? Remember, this is determinant of u minus lambda equal to 0. What will be the order of the equation when we simplify this? Pardon me? U is a 3 by 3 matrix. 3. So we will get a matrix, sorry, we will get a polynomial, on the left hand side we will get a polynomial in lambda of degree 3. So what we will get then is lambda cube minus lambda square u11 plus u22 plus u33 plus lambda square times something minus determinant of u equal to 0. I did not write what is multiplying lambda square. Oh, sorry. Third term, multiplying lambda. So it's lambda cube minus lambda square times something plus lambda times something minus determinant of u equal to 0. So this cubic equation has how many roots? This cubic equation has how many roots? Right. It must have 3 roots. It has 3 roots. They may not be distinct and they may not be real. They could be complex. However, actually what I'm teaching is linear algebra now. It's not continuum mechanics. Okay? However, if U is symmetric, then all 3 lambdas are real. If U is symmetric, then all 3 lambdas are real. Okay? So let's denote them. Also, determinant of U equals the product of these 3 roots. The determinant of U equals the product of 3 roots, 3 eigenvalues. So if the eigenvalues of U are positive, then determinant of U will be positive. So a matrix whose all eigenvalues are positive is called a positive definite matrix. A matrix all of whose eigenvalues are positive is called a positive definite matrix. So if we assume if determinant of f, and this is the last thing I will say, if determinant of f is positive, which we assumed, okay, we assumed that J Jacobian, which is the determinant of f, is positive. So what is determinant of f? From this equation, f is equal to Ru. It's the product of the determinant of R and the determinant of U. So it's determinant of R and determinant of U. What is the determinant of R? R is an orthogonal matrix. R is an orthogonal matrix. What is the determinant of R? Either 1 or plus 1. sorry, either plus 1 or minus 1. So we are going to consider a proper orthogonal matrix. So it's plus 1. So that means determinant of F is equal to determinant of U, because determinant of R is 1, and therefore this is equal to, so therefore lambda 1 times lambda 2 times lambda 3 must be greater than 0. So please review, this material is in the preliminaries part. Okay. Or open a book on linear algebra, or Google it, or go to Yahoo. Okay. And you have homework assignment, so don't forget.
How can you answer that this R is proper orthogonal? By choosing a coordinate system right hand, it may be not proper.
No, we are staying in one coordinate system. Otherwise, my U will be in a different coordinate system too.
And we
My
should
F
choose
will be-
the right hand rule.
No, but F will, see F is in the, F is also in the right-handed coordinate system. So everything we are keeping in the same coordinate system. So it depends on in which coordinate system F was determined. If you say that is in left-handed, then everything will be in left-handed.
And if we assume that our coordinate system is left hand, then
We'll see.
this determinant should be
No,
unique.
no, the F is still, determinant of F is still positive because we assume that. Right? We assume determinant of F is positive.
Thank you.
I had a quick finite element question, if you don't mind answering.
Okay.
Basically, I don't think I really got this qualitatively in my undergrad class on it. I've always heard
So you are John Weisskopf? What's your name?
Daniel Cooper.
Okay.
You have quad elements and you have triangle elements.
Right.
For assuming linear elements, ignoring quadratics. And every program I've ever used has always said, avoid the triangle ones, use the quads if you can. What is it fundamentally that makes the triangular ones more inaccurate? Does that make sense?
They are not more inaccurate.
Do you
They are
know
not.
why ANSYS and all these give me warnings about that? Because it doesn't make sense to me as long as you have the same number of nodes per.
No, the accuracy doesn't, no, wait. There is no guarantee that you will get the same order of accuracy even if you keep the number of nodes same. However, it's preferable to use triangles over quadrilaterals most of the time.
Really?
Yes.